Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Financial Commute. I'm your host, Chris Galeski, joined by wealth advisor Mike Rudow. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I always have a hard time calling you Mike Rudow because I call you Mikey all the time. Yeah, I just want to say Mikey.
And you call my dad Big Mike.
Big Mike,
So,
yeah. But he's a lot taller than I am.
and me.
Came across an article. I know you and Sasan at our investor symposium talked a lot about AI and the future of AI, not just in our business, but in general. So there's some key takeaways from that. But the Wall Street Journal had an interesting article over the weekend, and the headline was, "Can AI replace your financial advisor?" And it said, not yet, but wait.
Yeah.
Before we get into like all of the useful things with AI and this technology, and there's a lot of them, and there's some issues with it too. One of the pain points that I have is that I already feel like as a society, we're getting too headline driven anyways. And if it was in Google, it's, like the word of the gospel, right? I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
It almost doesn't matter what it said in the internet, but because it's out there in the internet, like there's some.
It's gotta be real, yeah.
And so my problem with that is that if this technology is taking any sort of that BS that's out there in the world as fact, and it's coming back with answers, there's some real danger that could come with that.
Absolutely. And I think when you think about AI being implemented or replacing our role, right, you gotta take a step back and really remember what AI is, what ChatGPT is, right? It's a large language model that it has access to a tremendous amount of data. And it takes all of that data and it pulls it together and it creates processes so that it can make its own decisions by summarizing that data. But the data is inherently flawed because there's a tremendous amount of bias in the data that's out there, right? It's raw data from the public market.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I think the article points to a couple of things, but it really catches your attention because early on it says, hey, you can use this technology to pass the bar exam.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And there are medical professionals using it to validate, their diagnosis, which kind of scares me.
Well, no, I think, so when you look at it that way, for the medical professionals, they've been using some sort of AI for a long time because what it'll allow them to do is access all of the medical information. Now, this is a defined set of information. It's not just pulling from all of the information that's out there. They take a refined set of information and they'll be able to look at a list of possible diagnoses from certain symptoms. So now they're cutting down their time to where they could really focus on, okay, if it's 1 through 12, this one makes the most sense as opposed to it could be anything, and they've got to spend a lot of time kind of refining that. So
yeah,
it really is useful as a hybrid model. And the medical profession has been kind of at the forefront of showing how AI can be implemented into a profession to where it's not replacing it, but it's enhancing it.
Yeah, and there are some good takeaways, not only from this article, but other studies that have shown how the medical profession has leveraged it. Came across an article not long ago. I actually read it. It wasn't a headline, but it mentioned how there was a research report of a study of, a few thousand people on the other side of the universe from the United States, right, over in Europe. And it was just published maybe 24 or 48 hours prior. And there was a doctor that's saying, hey, I'm seeing these symptoms. What could this be? And the technology actually pulled, based off those symptoms, this research report that had just been published and put it to the forefront, and they were able to use that to better diagnose their patient.
Yeah.
And so like access to information, but then getting that information quickly. So again, the AI stuff or ChatGPT, the output is only as good as the input.
Absolutely. I think that's where we need to really be careful on how we implement it and what data is being accessed to provide that output. And I think bringing it back to, right, can AI replace a financial advisor? Well, think of what a financial advisor's role is. Like, what do you think the most important thing that we do is?
I mean, you've got to understand what a client's, needs, wants, goals, fears, comfort level is. I mean, it's all the intangibles as opposed to the data set.
Right.
Because how someone reacts or responds to volatility or certain events more often determines the outcome as opposed to the other thing.
Absolutely. And I think where we could see AI being a tool for that is being able for us to identify the client's needs, wants, ambitions, goals, right? then developing a risk portfolio for that client, or risk profile, sorry, for that client. And then from there, strategizing on an optimal portfolio. We can use AI to help build those models, to help streamline processes so that we're able to be more efficient and be more customer focused, client focused, so that we could spend more time with them and really becoming a part of their family and understanding how we can help them get the most life out of their wealth, as opposed to spending more time in charts and in data. So absolutely. Will it be effective as a hybrid model? Yes. Will AI be able to replace the relationship that we're building with our clients and how we're spending our time trying to get them to accomplish their dreams? I don't see that as, I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it at all. I'm actually looking forward and will embrace the technology. I know Megan, our chief investment officer, sitting there saying, "Hey, hasn't anybody seen Terminator? Like, I kind of know how this ends."
Yeah.
I don't know if it's gonna go that way, but I'm excited about the technology. I use it, I would say, on a weekly basis for a number of different things to help save time.
Yeah.
But again, I'm using more of a hybrid model, asking it things that I already know the answers to, so that way I could create some sort of content out of that. But one of the interesting things about the article, now, I think all of us that have been to the doctor have experienced poor bedside manner from a doctor. They're very clinical. They're very factual. Even one of my closest friends is a doctor, and it's funny, the lack of empathy. In the article, it said that there was a competition between medical professionals and then the software, ChatGPT, to not only diagnose, but give the diagnosis in an empathetic response. And then a panel of professionals
We judged
it.
Yeah.
And from an empathetic standpoint, the technology won.
4% of the answers from the actual physicians were noted as empathetic or really empathetic. 4%. So basically it was stock standard, hey, here's the diagnosis, good luck, right? Not quite that, but from the ChatGPT model, over 40% were considered empathetic and trying to further meet the needs of the patient. And that is largely due to the data that it's pulling, right? Which shows that humans naturally are empathetic, where doctors might be more in a stressed environment trying to get to the black and white of it, because a lot of times doctors are overworked. So I think that was a big takeaway from me too, because how is that going to affect our industry? Right. And empathy is a big deal for us because markets are volatile, and we as a firm might not invest in the public markets like most financial advisors, but we do still have the volatility from the investments that we have in the public markets. So I thought it was interesting that we could even utilize ChatGPT in a way that would still show our empathy to our clients and even maybe accelerate that a bit.
Look, I think it can definitely help. You can maybe run by a response and say, "Hey, can you make sure that this is more empathetic?" And then you can come edit it. Besides the empathy part, which I thought was the key human element that this technology would need to overcome to be able to replace a human. The other one was biases, right? Humans are known to have biases. And we've said for many, many years, working together, that it's not our job to put our values on our clients' money.
Absolutely.
It's our job to work with our clients around their values, implement the decisions that they need to with their money and their decisions that they would like for their lives and their future generations. And so I was always thinking, maybe this technology can remove the bias from some of these decisions that humans have. But no, it actually says it increases it even more, because this is very black and white. There is no gray area when it comes to this technology, and it makes this technology overconfident in the advice that it gives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the example they gave was spot on, where if you look at short-term volatility and you just took the last year of market returns and market data, and you put that in front of a client and said, okay, here's what the market's done the last year. How do you want to allocate your portfolio? People were way risk off, even if they had a 30-year time horizon, right? Where they know they're not touching that money for 30 years until retirement. the average portfolio size was 40% in equities and 60% in fixed income. Whereas where they put the same data in front, or now a new set of data that was long-term returns for the market, and they asked the same question, how do you want to allocate the portfolio? People went to the other side of the spectrum and were 90% in equities and 10% in fixed income. So it shows that when people are scared, they get reserve and they tend to invest with less confidence and
take risk off
the table.
I mean, and to be fair, right? If you're a person and somebody said, hey, well, the market averages 8 to 10% a year over however many times, you're going to say, look, I want 8 to 10% a year and I'm comfortable with that. And that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
You're going to be more inclined to want to put more dollars in that space. And then if I said to you, well, in that journey to get that 8 to 10% that you're going to average over a long period of time, you have to be willing to have a down 50 or an up 50 year within a 12-month period.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to be comfortable seeing your $1 million be 500,000 or 1.5 million in the next 12 months? And your answer is no, you're going to have less stocks.
Right.
So that's the silliness with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just make a decision based on that. Right. It's going to be a deeper conversation. It's going to be understanding, what the fears are, what keeps them up at night.
Yeah.
And that's where I don't think AI will ever be able to replace an advisor.
One of the biggest takeaways that I took from this is, financial literacy in our economy or even the world, it's just not where it needs to be.
Right.
We need to do a better job of educating and empowering people on choices that they need to make around money and finances and debt. And access to a financial advisor is sometimes not there for every single person. But this technology could potentially get to a point whereas people need to make decisions if the data set gets good enough that they have access to maybe really good advice that they were not able to get somewhere else. They still might need a second opinion or
an advisor to overlook that. Right. It levels the playing field, right? And we saw that if you listen to Sasan and I's presentation on AI in the education space. It's tremendous how now, whether you're living in a remote area or an inner city kid with less access to, the proper necessities to have a quality education, AI is going to allow you to have the same access and the same type of education materials as anywhere else in the world. It's the same for financial advice, where our industry could be called flawed because we're incentivized to work with people who already have wealth accumulated. So the people that are getting the advice aren't always the people that need the advice the most, where AI can change that model in the sense where advisors can take on more relationships if that's the target.
Yeah.
Because they can accomplish more in less time, so they can impact more people by having an AI model hybrid where they're overlooking what the recommendations are, getting those recommendations out to people who need advice, and kind of having that dual system. So I really do think it levels the playing field in the sense that people that need advice will have access to advice.
I don't disagree. Right now, I struggle with a little bit. I was on ChatGPT and I wrote in, I've got a net worth of $2.5 million. The majority.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's fake.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
pretending.
Yeah.
But I went into the software and I said, look, I've got a net worth of $2.5 million. The majority of it is in a trust account, maybe $500,000 in a retirement account. I'm still working and saving, making about $500,000 a year. I'd like to minimize or avoid taxes as much as possible. And it took about 30 seconds to a minute to give me a response. It said I should consider a charitable remainder trust, a family foundation, and more aggressive tax strategies and write-offs.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, it's like, okay, it didn't know my age. It didn't know what my income needs were. And it recommended a charitable remainder trust and a family foundation. I'm not sure the net worth of $2.5 million. And I'd be
so eager to get
I'd be so eager just to give up access and control to my money in a family foundation, which is likely to do a lot of good, or a charitable remainder trust where the end dollars are going to go benefit a charity.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that was the best advice.
No, probably not, especially not at this moment in your life. Right. Which is why having an advisor that would overlook, that type of advice and then tweak the recommendations would be really important if that were the model that were being used for financial advice. And the article, one last thing going back to the article, when you think about best interest or consistency.
Or the fiduciary.
The fiduciary role, right? We act as fiduciaries to our client to make sure that their best interest is always top, right? Taking out bias. And when AI was implemented to make a decision for a client, what they noticed was that it didn't always take the client's best interest in mind. What it did was it looked at funds that might have had the highest marketing budget, right? That were pushed the most.
Higher sponsor.
Right, higher sponsored money. And that, if the goal is for a client, might be to keep the lowest cost fund and index against the market, right? The recommendations that were coming out weren't in the best interest of the client, which I found interesting because that's not what you would assume from a large language model.
Right.
And another point too was that when you think of the accuracy part of it, there was a really good example of typing into ChatGPT, hey, I want to compare Fidelity Fund to a Vanguard S&P 500 index fund, so I can see which one I want to go to. The ChatGPT formulated an answer, spit out a response with confidence saying, you should go with the Vanguard fund because, the long-term returns, the fees. And when you look at it, the fund that it used was actually a NASDAQ fund for Vanguard, and it compared to a Fidelity real estate.
Yeah, I know. The explanation and the analysis was spot on. It was analyzing two completely different things.
Yeah, when it had no relevance, right? And so that's where you really got to be careful if you are using it now as a means to get advice and get answers for yourself. You shouldn't be doing that without consulting.
Without a doubt. And I think it goes back to, something I said earlier with, as a society, we're going more towards truths on the internet and headlines being facts. And, that's my fear with this technology. It's a very powerful technology. It's going to allow us to scale our advice and do some amazing things over time.
Yeah.
But we have to be extremely careful and, gut check it. And so it's more or less that hybrid environment that you and Sasan were talking about.
Yeah.
Where we're working in collaboration with this technology to give great advice and scale.
Yeah, and it's going to take time for these layers to be built on top of this large language model, on top of ChatGPT, so we could refine the data that we're using to create the output, the desired output, right? Because right now, if you're just taking from all data, then it's a shot in the dark, right? But once this starts to evolve and data sets are pulled together to where you could have targeted data for different aspects, then I think it could be a very impactful model.
Yep, I agree. Jamie Dimon, for years was saying no Bitcoin, no Bitcoin, no Bitcoin, and recently he's like, okay, Bitcoin's a thing. So I don't want to forget about Bitcoin, but I don't want to get caught with AI by saying no AI, no AI, no AI.
Yeah.
Now there's AI. So not to upset Megan with the whole Terminator thing. I think AI is here. I think it can add value to organizations and our society, but we have to be very careful about, how we're using it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that if you're not thinking about it and if you're not starting to think about how it can impact your business, then you're going to fall behind and that will be more of an impact by not showing how this can be utilized, because it's going to be in every industry. It just depends on it.
Well, it is Halloween. We're likely to see a few Terminators out there tonight. Let's just hope that they're not part of this technology.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me. This was fun.